Welcome to the deep dive. We've got kind of a fascinating paradox to unpack for you today.
Yeah, it really is. It's a remarkable scenario.
I want you to picture this. He's got a high school teacher. He is standing in a classroom in Beijing teaching what, most people would assume is a pretty dry, heavy mathematical concept.
Right.
But he's using this exact framework to accurately predict massive shifting global events.
It's incredible to watch. We're exploring the teachings of Professor Jiang Xueqin today. He's a Yale educator, and he runs this highly influential YouTube channel called Predictive History.
Oh, yeah.
And his track record over the last few years has just completely captured the attention of strategists and academics globally.
People have been calling him the Chinese Nostradamus.
Right.
Ever since that viral video from back in 2024, the one where he accurately predicted the re-election of Donald Trump, the rising complexities with Iran, and basically the final results of the election.
Yeah, that was the one that really put him on the map.
Exactly. And fast forward to today, his March 2026 geopolitical analyses are making waves all over again. But the crazy thing is, he isn't using crystal balls or, intuition.
No, not at all. He is strictly using game theory combined with structural history.
Which brings us to our mission for today. We're going to decode his methodology.
We really want to strip away the dense academic jargon that usually surrounds game theory. Because if we look directly at Professor Jiang's lectures and the historical texts he relies on, we can map out exactly how he uses this math to interpret the world.
And for you listening, by the end of our time together, you are going to walk away with a new cognitive lens. It's almost like a superpower.
It really is.
You'll be able to act as a master strategist in your own life. Because whether you are negotiating a salary or navigating modern dating or just trying to make sense of the evening news,
understanding these mechanics completely changes how you view the board. Once you understand the underlying math of human interaction, you just begin to see it everywhere.
It shifts your whole perspective. You stop reacting to events and you start anticipating them, like a video game almost.
That's a great way to put it. Imagine life is a massive multiplayer video game, and your success depends entirely on what the other players do.
Right.
Most of us understand game theory as just the math behind strategic decision-making. But Professor Jiang takes this incredibly complex math and distills it into a core triad for his high school students.
Just 3 elements.
Exactly. He teaches that every single interaction boils down to players, strategies, and payoffs.
Players, strategies, payoffs.
You identify the people involved, map out the choices they can make, and calculate the reward or consequence they receive at the end.
Because every player just wants to maximize their payoff.
Right. But the catch is, they have to make their move based on what they calculate the other person will do. And Jiang uses that fundamental triad to predict international conflicts.
Which is wild. But to understand how a simple triad can predict a war, we really have to look at the historical foundation of this math.
The origins.
Yeah. It traces back to 1944. There was this mathematician, John von Neumann. Absolute genius. He was instrumental in creating modern computer architecture.
Oh yeah, he was everywhere.
Right. And he teamed up with Oscar Morgenstern to publish this foundational text called Theory of Games and Economic Behavior.
And that book essentially birthed the field. But at the time, it was mostly limited to what we call zero-sum games,
where one person's win is mathematically balanced by another person's loss, like chess.
Exactly. But the true revolution happened a few years later, in 1950, with John Nash. His contribution just fundamentally altered modern economics and mathematics.
And people listening probably recognize Nash from the film A Beautiful Mind.
Right, the Russell Crowe movie.
Yeah. But how did he actually change the mathematical landscape of game theory?
He introduced what we now call the Nash equilibrium.
Okay.
And this is a concept that a lot of people misunderstand. They think it just means a stalemate. But in reality, a Nash equilibrium is a state in a game where no player can increase their own payoff by changing their strategy unilaterally.
So if everyone else stays doing what they're doing,
if every other player keeps their strategy exactly the same, changing your move won't help you. In fact, it might hurt you.
You're locked in.
It is a state of no profitable deviation. And Nash mathematically proved that every finite game has at least one of these equilibriums, whether players are using a single fixed strategy or mixing their probabilities.
And the impact of that discovery is staggering. Looking at the source material, 15 economists have won the Nobel Prize thanks to game theory applications.
It's foundational. Nash won it himself in 1994, sharing the prize with John Harsanyi and Reinhard Selten. The math is just airtight.
So to really see how a Nash equilibrium forces our hand in the real world, we should break down the most famous thought experiment in the entire field.
The prisoner's dilemma.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's set this up for your listening. I'll lay out the scenario, and I want you to walk us through the actual payoff matrix, because that is where the psychological trap lives.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine you and an accomplice are arrested for a crime. The police put you in two completely separate interrogation rooms. You cannot communicate with your partner at all.
Total isolation.
Right. And the interrogator gives you a choice. You can cooperate with your partner by staying silent, or you can betray your partner by confessing and basically throwing them under the bus. So how does the math actually trap them here?
We have to map the numbers carefully. Scenario 1. You both cooperate and stay silent. The police lack hard evidence, so you both just get a minor charge of 1 year in jail.
Okay.
Mathematically, that's a -1 payoff for you and a -1 for your partner.
Not terrible.
Right. Scenario 2. You both betray each other. The police have confessions from both sides, so you both get 5 years in prison. That is a -5 payoff for each of you.
So far, staying silent is clearly the better option.
It is. But there's a third scenario that breaks the trust. This is the dilemma.
Here we go.
Scenario 3. One of you betrays and the other stays silent. If you betray your partner but they stay silent, the interrogator gives you full immunity. You walk out with 0 years in jail.
You're free.
But your partner takes the maximum sentence of 10 years, a -10 payoff. And of course, the reverse is true if they betray you while you stay loyal.
Okay, so pure logic and rationality are supposed to guide us to the best outcome, right? But if I'm sitting in that room, what does cold rationality tell me to do?
Cold rationality dictates that you must always betray your partner. It is your strictly dominant strategy.
Wow.
Look at the matrix from your isolated perspective. If you think your partner is going to stay silent, betraying them gets you 0 years instead of 1.
Right.
And if you think your partner is going to betray you, betraying them back gets you 5 years instead of 10.
So it doesn't matter what they do.
No matter what they do, your individual payoff is always higher if you confess.
That is such a tragic irony. Because if both players act purely rationally and betray each other, they both get 5 years. But if they had just abandoned cold rationality and trusted each other, they would have only served 1 year.
Exactly. Rationality actively leads to a worse outcome for everyone involved.
It's a really profound realization about the limits of pure self-interest. But the source material highlights this massive breakthrough from 1980 that proves humans have a mathematical workaround for this.
Yeah, this is where it gets optimistic. There was a political scientist named Robert Axelrod, and he organized a very unique computer tournament. He invited game theorists from all around the world to submit computer programs to play the prisoner's dilemma against each other.
But the crucial difference here is that this was the iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Right.
They weren't just playing once. The programs played each other hundreds of times in a row. They had memory. They could establish a reputation.
The shadow of the future completely changes the math.
It does.
The winning strategy in Axelrod's tournament was surprisingly simple. It was a code submitted by Anatol Rappaport called tit for tat.
Tit for tat.
And the algorithm only had 2 rules. First, on the very first move of the game, you always cooperate. You stay silent.
Okay.
Second, on every subsequent move, you simply copy whatever your opponent did on their previous turn.
So if they cooperated, you cooperate next. But if they betrayed you, you immediately retaliate.
Exactly.
It's an eye for an eye, but it begins with an olive branch.
And Axelrod published these findings in his 1984 book, The Evolution of Cooperation. He proved that even among completely selfish algorithms, intelligent cooperation wins out in the long run.
Because tit for tat succeeded because it was nice, meaning it never betrayed first.
Right, it was retaliatory, so it couldn't be endlessly exploited.
Mm-hmm.
And it was forgiving, meaning it would return to cooperation the moment the other player did.
So science actually demonstrated that when repetition is on the line, being a cooperative player who defends themselves is mathematically superior to being ruthless.
Yes. And Professor Jiang takes this exact concept, the transition from a single-play game to an iterated game, and applies it to modern romance.
This is my favorite part of the source material.
It's brilliant. In his first lecture, he uses game theory to analyze why modern dating feels so chaotic today.
Mm-hmm.
He frames dating as a non-cooperative game with imperfect information.
Because you don't actually know what the other person's true intentions are.
Right. And when he asks his high school students why people ghost each other, he maps it directly to a payoff matrix.
Of course he does.
In the early stages of dating, the dominant short-term strategy is to avoid investing too much emotion. Because if you invest heavily and the other person doesn't, you suffer a massive negative payoff. You get hurt.
You take the -10.
Exactly. To protect yourself from that -10 payoff, you pull back. You disappear. You ghost.
It is the exact rational trap of the interrogation room. Protecting yourself by ghosting seems perfectly rational in a single interaction.
But dating is an iterated game.
Right. We live in a society where people interact repeatedly. By choosing the short-term dominant strategy, people build a culture of ghosting, where trust just evaporates.
The dominant strategy ensures that everyone ends up isolated and frustrated. The entire dating pool gets locked into a Nash equilibrium of loneliness.
A Nash equilibrium of loneliness. That is so bleak, but it perfectly illustrates how universal the math is.
It dictates everything.
The sources provide this compelling list of how these matrices dictate fields far beyond high school classrooms or dating apps. Like, take the 2020 Nobel Prize in Economics. It was awarded to Paul Milgram and Robert Wilson.
Yes.
They use game theory to solve a massive real-world problem, how governments should sell 5G radio spectrums to telecom companies.
Selling invisible radio waves for billions of dollars.
It sounds like an administrative nightmare. How did game theory actually solve it?
Well, before Milgram and Wilson, spectrum auctions often suffered from what's called the winner's curse.
Oh.
A company would overbid for a license, win it, and then realize they couldn't make a profit, and the entire 5G rollout would stall. Or you'd have cunning companies using game theory to exploit the auction rules.
How so?
They'd buy up spectrum just to block their competitors, which lead to dead zones for consumers.
So they manipulated the strategies to secure a monopoly payoff.
Precisely. So to fix this, Milgram and Wilson designed the simultaneous multiple round auction. Instead of auctioning licenses one by one, all the licenses were auctioned simultaneously over many rounds.
Okay, so everyone can see the board.
Yes. It allowed companies to see the bidding landscape, gather perfect information about the value of the licenses, and shift their strategies to build continuous network areas without overpaying.
They essentially designed a set of rules that aligned the selfish payoffs of the telecom companies with the cooperative payoff of a functioning national 5G network.
And it worked beautifully.
And the applications jumped from telecommunications straight into the natural world, too. John Maynard Smith famously applied evolutionary game theory to biology.
Right, to explain animal behavior.
Specifically, why wasps use what is known as a hawk-dove strategy.
In evolutionary biology, the payoff isn't money. It's reproductive success and survival.
Right.
Maynard Smith analyzed how animals compete for resources. A hawk strategy means fighting aggressively until you win or get severely injured. A dove strategy means displaying aggression, but retreating if an actual fight breaks out.
So if a population was entirely made of doves, they would just posture at each other and split the resources.
But a single mutant hawk introduced into that population would dominate entirely. It would get the maximum payoff every single time.
But as the hawk population grows, they start running into other hawks.
Exactly. And the negative payoff of severe injury from a hawk-on-hawk fight is so devastating that being a dove suddenly becomes mathematically viable again.
Wow.
Maynard Smith proved that populations naturally settle into an evolutionary stable strategy. It's basically a biological Nash equilibrium where a specific ratio of hawks to doves guarantees the survival of the species.
It is so fascinating to realize that the rules of strategy dictate the animal kingdom just as strictly as human economics. And we're looking at a variety of game structures here.
Yes.
We mentioned zero-sum games earlier, like chess, and non-zero-sum games like the telecom auctions, where multiple players can walk away with a positive payoff.
The sources also touch on mixed strategies.
Oh, right.
Think of a game of rock, paper, scissors. If you strictly play a single strategy, say you always throw a rock, your opponent will immediately observe your pattern and play paper.
Right, they exploit it.
To prevent exploitation, you have to randomize your moves. You mix your probabilities so that your opponent cannot optimize their strategy against you.
And Professor Jiang has earned his reputation by taking all of these concepts, the prisoner's dilemma, mixed strategies, iterated games, and combining them with structural history to predict global conflicts.
He treats the geopolitical stage like an incredibly complex game board.
Almost like Isaac Asimov's psychohistory.
That's a great comparison. And his approach relies heavily on a concept he calls the law of asymmetry.
Let's break that down.
When analyzing global politics, we often assume the larger military or economic power holds the dominant strategy. But Jiang posits that the underdog, the seemingly weaker player, actually has a distinct mathematical advantage if they manipulate the matrix intelligently.
Let's look at his March 2026 analysis of the United States and Iran. And just to be extremely clear here for you listening, we are treating this strictly as a mathematical board game.
Completely.
We are mapping out the strategies and payoffs just as he does in his lectures, without taking any political stance on the actual conflict. Stripping away the politics, how does he map the strategies here?
Jiang evaluates the conflict by looking at asymmetric payoffs. If a weaker power engages in a conventional symmetrical war against a superpower, their payoff is catastrophic defeat.
Right, negative 100.
So the dominant strategy for the underdog is to absolutely refuse to play that specific game. Instead, they shift the game to a war of attrition, they utilize proxy groups, they leverage asymmetric warfare, and attempt to sway international public opinion.
So they basically change the rules to alter the larger power's payoff matrix.
Precisely. By dragging the game out indefinitely and avoiding a conventional resolution, the underdog significantly raises the cost for the dominant power.
Right.
For the larger player, the mathematical cost of achieving a definitive win becomes so high, economically and politically, that it becomes an irrational strategy to pursue it.
So the underdog favors themselves not by overpowering the opponent, but by manipulating the opponent's cost-benefit ratio.
Exactly.
And there's a terrifying historical precedent for applying these matrices to global survival. The source text brings up the Cuban Missile Crisis,
Right.
which was deeply analyzed by Thomas Schelling. He actually won the 2005 Nobel Prize for his work on game theory and national security.
Schelling introduced the concept of the credible threat.
How does that work in a nuclear standoff?
Well, in a standoff involving nuclear weapons, simply threatening your opponent isn't enough, because pulling the trigger results in mutual destruction. A negative 100 payoff for everyone.
Right, everyone loses.
So the threat isn't mathematically credible, because no rational player would ever execute it.
So how do you convince an opponent that you will actually make an irrational move?
Schelling analyzed how nations engage in brinkmanship. He called it the threat that leaves something to chance.
Okay.
A player might intentionally tie their own hands or delegate authority to lower-level commanders. They effectively introduce a mixed strategy of chaos.
Wow.
By proving you have relinquished total control, the chance of a catastrophic accident becomes real. You force the other player to back down, not through a rational threat, but by mathematically increasing the probability of an uncontrollable disaster.
It's just chilling to think that the decisions made using these matrices literally hold the fate of the world in the balance. But when Professor Jiang looks at the board today, he's just identifying the players, calculating their available strategies, and weighing their potential payoffs based on these established mathematical laws.
We have really covered a vast amount of territory today.
We have.
Moving from John von Neumann's early equations to spectrum auctions, evolutionary biology, dating culture, and the geopolitical brinkmanship of nuclear powers.
Yeah.
But the ultimate lesson from Professor Jiang's predictive history is deeply empowering.
It really is. Game theory proves that you do not have to be a passive victim of the systems around you.
You're a player.
You are an active player on the board. You have the agency to map out the interactions in your life and adjust your strategies accordingly.
And the source material leaves us with a practical challenge for you. The next time you find yourself in a mundane negotiation, whether you are haggling over the price of a car or simply trying to agree on an arrival time with your partner for dinner,
take a moment to formalize it. Draw the payoff matrix in your head. Identify the players involved, outline the strategies available to both of you, and honestly define the payoffs.
try to locate the Nash equilibrium. Ask yourself if you are trapped in a zero-sum mentality where you feel you have to win at their expense. Can you shift the parameters to a non-zero-sum game? By applying the principles of tit for tat, starting with cooperation and maintaining clear boundaries, you can actively construct a better outcome.
Because approaching everyday friction as an iterated game of strategy completely neutralizes the emotional stress. You just evaluate the matrix and make your move.
I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder, building on the science of strategy we've explored today.
Lay it on us.
We are entering an era where artificial intelligence begins making more and more critical decisions for us. From algorithmic stock trading to resolving complex, smart contract legal disputes.
Okay.
What happens when two perfectly rational, highly advanced AI agents get locked into a prisoner's dilemma with real human livelihoods hanging in the balance? In a digital game of tit for tat operating at the speed of light, who blinks first?
That is a very chilling scenario to consider. A massive thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope you walk away seeing the invisible matrices around you just a little bit clearer. Keep analyzing the board, keep questioning the strategies, and keep playing the game of life a little bit smarter. Catch you next time.